So I've got Brad Thompson. Is Brad right? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
okay?
that works.
From Clemson University, and I'm going to let him tell you who he is and what he does.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Bennett. Let me just begin by apologizing to your audience for my gruff appearance. I had surgery a few days ago, and I've got tubes and drains and whatnot hooked up, which means I haven't been able to clean up in a few days. So apologies for that. I am Brad Thompson. I'm the executive director of the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism at Clemson University, formerly the Clemson Institute for the Study of Capitalism, but because of an extraordinary gift from David and Lynette Snow 6 months ago, we changed the name of the institute to the Snow Institute in their honor. The Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism is America's premier university-based teaching and research center dedicated to exploring the moral foundations of capitalism. So we're not economists. We don't do economics. Some of us are not even interested in economics per se. We're really interested in exploring the historical, moral, and political foundations of capitalism. And I can say a lot more about what that actually means and what the Institute does. But let me also mention that I'm the founder and director of what is now our premier academic program at the Snow Institute and at Clemson University, and that is the Lyceum program. And the Lyceum program is a scholarship program. We now give 20 scholarships per year to incoming freshmen, renewable over 4 years. And in exchange for the scholarship, the students participate in our academic program, which uses a great books approach to studying the history of liberty, capitalism, the American founding, and the principles of moral character. And I can say a lot more about the Lyceum program as well as we go through the program.
Yeah, amazing, super competitive program too. How many folks did you have apply for the program this past academic year?
Yeah, well, so we began the program 10 years ago, and it happened really, really quickly. And at the time it was me and 2 staff members, and we had no idea what we were doing. And for that first year, we were expecting 30 to 50 applications for a program that nobody in the United States knew anything about. That first year, we had 190 applications from high school students in 20 states. For this year's current freshman class, we had over 1,000 applications from students in 45 states. So the demand for the program, the demand for this kind of education has exploded. And I think that portends really quite interesting things for the future. So that number, which is really quite stunning, tells us that there is a yearning, burning desire of ordinary, everyday Americans across the fruited plain. That's both high school students and maybe even more importantly, their parents, who are done with woke you, done with political correctness, do not want their children censored or indoctrinated at university anymore. And so they're looking for alternatives. And, we filled this space at exactly the right moment. And so, we actually try to limit now the number of applications because it's just my team is too small, and we have the most competitive, literally the most competitive application process in the country, by which I mean not only just in terms of the ratio between the number of applicants and the number we accept, but we actually have a real application, right? We have a 19th century level quality application, which is to say we require our applicants to write 3 essays, and they're not your typical infantile, why do you want to go to college? Why do you want to dig wells in Guatemala question? The questions we ask, for instance, are to identify the book that has most influenced your life and to explain why. We have a second question that asks the following: why be moral? And then a third question asking them to identify the relationship between a free society and politics. So these are real applications, but that, of course, that means with 3,000 applications, or sorry, 1,000 applications and 3 essays, that's 3,000 essays that my team has to read. So actually this year we artificially limited the number of applications just because we're just overwhelmed. But the most important thing to say, of course, is that there is this. We're at an extraordinary inflection point right now in American higher education, and the traditional mainstream colleges and universities, they are failing in serious ways. And let's take the most obvious example of the so-called Ivy League. The Ivy League is dying. It's dying right in front of us. The Ivy League has become a clown show. And there is a new Ivy League that is forming in the United States south of the Mason-Dixon line. And the new Clemson is the new Harvard. And you have other universities like University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of Florida, University of Tennessee, University of Mississippi, University of Texas. All of these universities have created new academic programs largely modeled on the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism and our Lyceum program. And this stuff is spreading. It's spreading like wildfire across America. And as the Ivy League and other elite so-called liberal institutions beclown themselves and are literally putting themselves out of business, and as student demographic, Gen Z demographic numbers decline precipitously, what you're going to have is a remaking of the education landscape over the course of the next 20 years. A lot of colleges, we're right now, 1 or 2 colleges are closing every other week in the United States. And that trend will not only continue, but it will expand. So a lot of schools are going to go out of business. And a lot of schools right now, once again, take the Ivy League. Not only are they committing academic suicide, but there is a movement to defund these universities at the highest levels, and it's happening. Like Columbia just lost $400 million. And I entirely support that. Higher education ought to be defunded entirely. In my own view, it ought to be completely 100% defunded. And we ought to introduce more free market principles into higher education. And if that happens, then traditional higher education in this country is going to change in massive ways over the course of the next 20 years. And the Snow Institute and our Lyceum program, we are leading the way in what I consider to be an academic revolution that is just now starting to take place in the United States.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you on all that you said. One of the things that I've seen that I love is with articles that you've written in books and whatnot, you've argued that capitalism is the only, what's the word? How did you phrase it? Moral economic system. Can you explain what you mean and why you believe it's superior to alternatives like socialism or mixed economies?
Absolutely. So let me begin by actually defining my terms. So when I speak of capitalism, I speak only of what I call laissez-faire capitalism.
Gotcha.
And laissez-faire capitalism, laissez-faire means let it be or hands off. And the question is, who should let it be? Whose hands should be kept off? And the answer is government.
Yes.
Government should have no role in a laissez-faire capitalist economy. So what that really means, actually, is that laissez-faire capitalism is not primarily an economic system. It is first and foremost a political system. It's about how you arrange your political institutions relative to the economy. And so I would say the second part of my definition of capitalism, or of laissez-faire capitalism, is that it requires a complete separation of economy and state, in the same way that in the United States we have a separation of church and state, and in the same way that we should but don't yet have a separation of school and state. And the government has no role, no business in controlling, managing, regulating, or taxing the economy. And so that's that. And you have to, and when the government frees up the economy, then what you do is you leave properly self-interested individuals to produce, to trade, in a market economy that is regulated by supply and demand, and profit and loss. The market economy is a self-regulating economic system, and so that is the economic system that I define as laissez-faire capitalism. And so the question then is, why do I consider this to be the only moral and just social system? Because it's the one and only system that leaves individuals free to pursue their own happiness, and most importantly, properly understood, laissez-faire capitalism is the one and only economic system, political economic system, that has as its primary purpose the protection of individual rights. No other economic political system has that as its goal. So top-down command economies, such as first, let's say, socialist and communist economies, they are premised entirely on the government controlling, regulating, and taxing both production and trade. And that is, in my view, immoral. It's immoral because it uses the coercive force of the state to control what people think, and how they associate with other people. And in a free society, coercive force, that is to say, more particularly, the initiation of physical force against private individuals is immoral. And capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, is the only system that leaves individuals free to pursue their own rational self-interest.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. I again totally agree with you. You're speaking my language.
Outstanding.
So when it comes to like the U.S. has historically been the world. Well, it's been the world's dominant economic power, right? Which has been reinforced its global influence and military strength. And how does I'll use the term laissez-faire capitalism now, because that's what you're really talking about, because I feel like the word capitalism has been so twisted, right? But how does that directly contribute to our national security? And like, what threats arise when we move towards more government intervention in the economy? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're asking
Yeah,
me,
it's a couple questions there, right?
Yeah. So you're asking me about things that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about.
Gotcha.
So, but I'm happy to share with you some at least preliminary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Views. Yeah. Right. So in my view, as I said, the only proper purpose of government is to protect the rights of individuals. So what does that mean in terms of the kind of government that you will have in order to protect the rights of individuals? And in my view, there are only three proper functions of government. The first is a police force to protect individuals within society from other individuals in society. You must also, secondly, have a court system, the purpose of which primarily is to adjudicate disputes when conflicts arise, as they always inevitably will, including in a free society, between individuals, because none of us, even the best amongst us, we are not infallible intellectually and morally, nor are we omniscient. We make mistakes, and when we deal with other people, not only do we make mistakes sometimes, but we do not clearly enough communicate our ideas to other people. So, for instance, one of the most important capacities and interests that men have is to trade with one another, to barter, to trade. And over the course of more than 1,000, 2,000 years, Western civilization and other civilizations have developed means by which to aid men in not just the transfer of property, but the transfer of property, time, ideas. And we do this through contracts. And the purpose of contracts, right, is to help individuals, right, particularly written contracts, where you lay down the terms of an agreement between two people for mutual gain. Before you had written contracts, as all you had were the faulty memories of individuals, right, which led often, right, to conflict. But even, as even contracts are incomplete, and contracts cannot predict changing circumstances in the future. They're the best mechanism we have, but they're not perfect. And this is one of the roles of a court system in a free society, is to adjudicate disputes between conflicting individuals, not to mention to hear criminal trials and to declare either innocent or guilty people who are accused of crimes. And then finally, and this goes really to your question, the third pillar of government in a free society is national defense, right? In the same way that you have bad guys internally to the country, there are bad foreign actors, particularly foreign states, who, on occasion, are willing to initiate physical force against a free people. So the question is, what then is the proper role of a military in a free society? And it's pretty simple, although actually it's simple to state but complicated to put into practice. The sole purpose of a military in a free society is to defend the people of a particular country from the initiation of force by an outside country or an outside nation or criminal organization. So my own view then, the way in which that translates into practical military action, it is a position of national defense first, and what that means is defending the country from enemies. Now, obviously, first and foremost, that means defending our borders. When foreign nations, like the increasingly militaristic Canada, thinks that they're going to drop below 5440, just kidding.
Yeah, right.
And invade the United States in order to prevent them from becoming the 51st state. Just kidding. And and so that's the first purpose of government. But of course, it's more complicated than just one nation invading another, right? There are nations, foreign nations, that have declared intentions, like, for instance, Iran, against the United States, and who commit acts of terrorism and murder against American citizens outside the borders of the United States, in which case the United States not only has a right, but a moral obligation to defend its citizens when they are being attacked outside of the nation. outside of the boundaries of the United States. And I believe it is a proper role of the United States military to defend U.S. citizens outside the country. So, again, a couple of concrete examples. Let's say let's say there's a nation, an Islamic terrorist regime somewhere in the Middle East that bombs an American barracks in Lebanon. Uh, does the United States have a right to launch military action against said nation? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes, it does. And not only does it have a right to do it, it should do it. Or, for instance, when same said country launches attacks against the American Navy and destroys ships and murders American sailors, that same United States of America has both a right and a moral obligation to defend its citizens. And if that is something that occurs time and time again, if nation A, an Islamic imperialistic fascistic regime, is over the course of a 40-year period taking American hostages and murdering U.S. citizens around the United States, that nation should lose entirely, 100%, its military capacity against American citizens. Now,
it's happening in Yemen right now too.
Yeah,
well, really in the Red Sea, right?
Yeah. Although what's happening in Yemen is, I mean, once again, the United States, this is a fail. I mean, we're doing what we should be doing without question, because they're launching missiles against private shipping and the U.S. Navy.
Yes.
So it's absolutely right that we put that to an end immediately. But of course, they're not the source of the problem.
Right. Correct.
And the real source of the problem has gone untouched for 40 years, and that is a major failing of American foreign policy.
Yes.
Now, let me add one last thing. I do not believe, under any circumstances, that it is the role or purpose of the government of the United States, or the role or the purpose of a free society, to be trying to, particularly using the American military, to promote so-called democracy around the world. So I am entirely opposed to, which we have seen over the course of the last 20 years, 30 years, attempts by the American government, including Republican administrations, who are trying to, who are involved in the business of regime change. And using the American military to support that regime change. And I'll give you one more concrete example. So let's take what's happening in another, now this is not quite Middle Eastern, but and let's say a nation adjacent to, in between Pakistan and Iran. That is a nation from which the worst attack on the United States in the post-World War period, where several thousand Americans were killed on September 11th. That was run by terrorist organizations supported by by regional national governments. The United States had a right and a moral obligation to go into that nation and to absolutely 100% destroy the enemy, which we did partially, but only partially. We let the rats out and we let the rats run, and that was a mistake. But an even bigger mistake was to think that we could change the cultural habits and mores and ideas of said country by going in and building roads and bridges and hospitals and schools for girls. I mean, this is utterly immoral. The idea that the United States would create a welfare state in a nation that is from which we were attacked is morally repulsive. So I am, and I think consistent with the principles of a free society, I am absolutely opposed to using the military force of the United States to export so-called democracy and American niceness to other nations.
Right. Absolutely. Along those lines, but switching more to a history, the historical side, you've written a few books. The one that I have read is America's Revolutionary Mind, right?
Yeah.
Which was fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
Um, and you one of your biggest arguments is that the American Revolution was deeply moral and uh, philosophical.
Yep.
And what lessons can modern Americans take from that era? Like, because it's things are so twisted as we know now, and we kind of look back on that era as, you know, with the good, bad, and the ugly. But what are some lessons that modern Americans can take from that era?
Yeah. So I would say there are two or three related ideas that they can take. So I'll start at the top, right? So I think first, politically and constitutionally, we should rediscover the founders' understanding of what a free government is, what a free society is. And I think we should restore what I call the laissez-faire Constitution of the United States. The laissez-faire Constitution of the United States created a constitutionally limited government that had really as its purpose what I considered that which I've already identified are the three functions of government, namely uh, defense, justice, and police. And that's effectively what we had with the Constitution of 1788. You know, in the first administrations of George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, really almost up until the Civil War, there were only, you know, the only executive branches that we had in the federal government were were finance, state, and justice.
Yeah.
Right.
And war. Right.
Yeah, and exactly. Department of War, precisely. Right.
And that's what it was called. I love that. The
Yeah.
Department of War.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. So that's number one. We ought to try as hard as we can to return to the founders' original laissez-faire Constitution. And I'm just utterly ecstatic today to learn that the current administration has just nixed the Department of Education at the federal level. This is the single most important domestic political event of my adult lifetime. And now that we've got the federal Department of Education out of business, we need to go after the other 50 state departments of education. Government should not be in the role of educating children. In the same way, if you do not want the government controlling, regulating, running Sunday schools, why would you want the government running regular schools Monday through Friday? So today was a great day. We got rid of the Department of Education. We've only got about 15 more departments to go to get back to the founder's vision. All right, so that's point one. Point two, we need to rediscover the moral principles of the American Revolution summed up in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We need to return to those core moral principles, and even more fundamentally, the first clause of the second sentence of the Declaration says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. The founders believed in the concept of truth that is objective, absolute, certain, permanent, and universal. And we need to return to that understanding of truth, and moral truth in particular. Today, in 21st century America, we live in what the hoity-toity, artsy-fartsy, namby-pamby intellectual class refers to as the post-truth world. There is no post-truth, is an oxymoron.
Right.
We need to return to the founders' conception of individual rights, and more particularly, more fundamentally, even philosophically, their understanding of what truth is. And then the third thing that I would say, and this might actually be the hardest thing, and I write about this in America's Revolutionary Mind, and that is it's absolutely imperative that we try to rediscover, recapture, and re-enliven what the revolutionary generation referred to as, quote, the spirit of the spirit of liberty. And this spirit of liberty it still exists in the American character, but it is dying. It is dying fast. It has been dying. It has been dying through much of the 20th century and now into the 21st century, and is on life support. What is the spirit of liberty? What was the founders' original understanding of this spirit of liberty? The spirit of liberty is both, it's an idea that men have a right and a moral obligation to live as free individuals. But it's more than just an idea. It's actually putting that idea into practice and actually living as a free person. But in the context of the world in which we live today, it's defending freedom against those who attack freedom, and more particularly defend freedom. So, for instance, let me give you a concrete example. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the so-called Stamp Act. And it was the Stamp Act which really sort of ignited the beginnings of the American, what would become the American Revolution. And if you think back to what happened in 1765, this stamp tax, compared to taxes that we have today, was absolutely minimal. It would be like putting a 2-cent tax on a can of soda. I mean, it was just,
Right.
It was a small, tiny, itsy bitsy tax, but the Americans immediately erupted in opposition to it, and they fought it. They fought it every inch of the way, because they believed that if you can pass a 2-penny tax or whatever small minimal tax that you want, then you have given the right to the government in the future to pass any size tax that it wants. And the Americans believed, as a core principle, that in the principle of no taxation without representation. And of course, connected to the Stamp Act was the fact that they were not represented in Parliament. And so the spirit of liberty says you cannot allow the government to establish any kind of precedent that would eventually, year after year, decade after decade, slowly erode your principles. In other words, fight, 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 and fight now. That's the spirit of American liberty. And that spirit, as I said, the flame of liberty in this country is slowly going out. And for that flame to be restored into not just the flame of a candle, but into a roaring fire, we have to rediscover that original spirit of American liberty.
Yes, absolutely agree. And with that, I have 4 daughters. The oldest is 30, the youngest is 16. And really, I mean, our generation, we can do stuff and fight the good fight and to try and restore that fire and throw fuel on it, right? But considering all this, what are your, and not necessarily just yours, but what do you see as the biggest challenges in teaching young people about the virtues of capitalism in an area where that we've been in, with whether it's collectivist ideas and socialism, communism, where these are increasingly popular? I feel like stuff is coming up against these now, but what are those biggest challenges?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest challenge of all is that the postmodern left has captured all, and I mean all, of the idea, opinion, and culture forming institutions in the United States. They can, most importantly, the left has a total monopoly, a hammerlock on American higher education. And if it has a hammerlock on American higher education, that means it also has a hammerlock on K-12 education. So let's just stick with education. Never mind all of the other,
Absolutely.
cultural institutions in the United States, right? So when you control the opinion forming institutions of a nation, ideas have consequences. Those ideas have, in the universities, have trickled down into the K-12 government schools, and from there they trickle down into the rest of the culture. So over the course of the last 100 years, with the left completely dominating the universities and the K-12 education system, and they do it through both indoctrination and censorship, they have literally changed the intellectual and moral culture of the nation. So, but which is absolutely dire. But to quote an old line from the 1950s anti-communist Hungarians, situation hopeless, not yet bad. Right?
Right.
Right? And what that means, though, I mean, as ominous as that sounds, there's actually, in that phrase, there's a glimmer of hope. And the glimmer of hope is that free men they cannot give up. We have to fight, fight, fight every single day for freedom. Now, let me explain a little bit more about how this has influenced the culture and what has to be done to counter it. So the first thing I would say is, let me pick on conservative, wealthy conservatives. If you think that you're going to change America by donating tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to the Republican Party, you're an idiot. You are not going to change anything. The only thing you're going to get is more of the deep state,
right? What we already have, right?
Exactly. If you want to change the culture, if you want to create a free society for your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, stop giving money to politics and political concerns. And you have to identify those organizations and those institutions that are involved in opinion forming, trying to shape the intellectual culture of the nation. So obviously, not surprisingly, I would say, if you are such a person and you want a future for your grandchildren, and you have disposable means, then rather than giving to the Republican Party, you should be giving your money to the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism, because we are retaking American higher education, which is the single most important thing that has to be done. So let me explain this a little bit more. Over the course of the last 100 years, the left has captured, in the battle of ideas, particularly the battle of ideas over capitalism, the left has captured the moral high ground, whereas conservatives and libertarians have captured the economic high ground. Conservatives and libertarians argue that capitalism is the best economic system ever devised by man because it's the most productive and efficient. which is 100% true. The problem with that argument, of course, is that Karl Marx knew that and said it in the Communist Manifesto. The problem with capitalism from Marx's perspective is that it's immoral and unjust. But in any battle of ideas between morality and economics over the course of time, morality always wins, which is why this country has been going down the road to socialism for 100 years. So that's why what we're doing at the Snow Institute is so important, because we're trying to recapture the moral high ground. So at a kind of macro level, that's what has to be done. We need to retake the universities, and if not retake the universities, we have to do what we claim that we do best, which is to think in the education space. We need to be entrepreneurial. We need to create new programs, new institutions. We need to create new colleges, new universities. We have to tear the corrupt system down, and we have to rebuild from the bottom up.
Absolutely.
Now, let me give you one more concrete example of what is being done to change things for the better. The single most important social revolution of the last 50 or 60 years in the United States is the homeschooling movement. Homeschooling movement is completely shaking the foundations of the education establishment in the United States. And America's homeschooling mothers are the leaders of the revolution. And we have to do everything in our power to support homeschooling. I'll give you a concrete example just from the news in the last 24 hours. The state of Illinois, the fascist state of Illinois, is trying to control and regulate homeschooling in Illinois, with the eventual goal, right? The neo-fascist left now wants to abolish homeschooling, right? And if ever there were a hill to die on, it's homeschooling. My wife and I homeschooled our children for 18 years. If it ever gets to the point where homeschooling is outlawed, I will go to jail and I will go on a starvation strike to oppose it. For me personally, this is the one issue that I will go to the mat for. Totally.
Yes, agreed. I wish I had done it. I guess is what that really comes down to. And that's one of my biggest, I guess you could call it a regret in life, is that I didn't institute that earlier, So we're getting there on time, but one of the questions I really wanted to ask you, and this just runs in perfectly, is obviously intellectuals play a major role in shaping culture. How do we because we bring up academia has been wholly co-opted by the left.
Yeah.
But how do we get more intellectuals to advocate for capitalism and liberty, frankly? How do we change those hearts and minds to then, help with changing the hearts and minds of the populace?
Yeah. So again, sorry for the self-promotion.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's and this is why we're here, and this is why we came to you, because you're one of the only people doing it.
Yeah.
If not the.
Yeah. No, exactly. So at the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism, and more particularly in our Lyceum program, let me talk about the outputs. We have a very entirely unlike American higher education, we have a very clear vision of the kind of human being that we want to educate, and we have a very clear vision of the outcomes, the kinds of students, the kinds of young men and women that we want to produce in our program. And we want to produce young men and women of high moral character to be active citizens of a free society. That's what we want to do. And our curriculum is designed entirely around that goal. So So in the Lyceum program, students are required to take 8 classes. Let me list 4. Freshman year, they do a course called Wisdom of the Ancients, a course in ancient Greek and Roman moral thought. Second year, they do a course on the political theory of capitalism. No other course in America like it. Junior year course on political thought of the American founding. And then senior year, the capstone course is Wisdom of the Moderns, a course in modern moral thought that examines mostly literature, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Dostoevsky, and Ayn Rand's novel, The Fountainhead. And all of these courses, in one way or another, are concerned not only with introducing students to ideas that they may have never heard about before, particularly, let's say, relative to capitalism, or on the American founding, right? We don't teach that America's founding fathers were racist, sexist, and homophobic, for instance. We teach that America's founding fathers were intellectual and moral giants. They were heroes, and they created the freest nation in the history of the world. And I should also add, this is actually really important. Maybe the single most unique feature of the Lyceum program is what we call the Socratic tutor program. So each one of our Lyceum scholars every semester is assigned what we call a Socratic tutor, faculty member connected to the program. And the Socratic tutor will meet with his or her students individually every other week for over an hour, the purpose of which is twofold. First, to help these young men and women translate the ideas that they're learning in class. Let's say they're reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and Wisdom of the Ancients. And the question is, how does your typical 21st century young American translate Aristotle's ideas into their world here now today? Because we do not believe that there can or should be a dichotomy between ideas and action. And then secondly, most importantly, we want our young men and women to take very seriously the question of moral character, and their moral character in particular, because we believe that there is an intimate relationship between moral character and a free society. You cannot have a free society made up of moral reprobates. And so that's how we're trying to change the minds and souls of our students, or at least influence them. And let me leave this question with just a couple of data points. In the last 3 years, so to answer your question specifically, like, how do we do this? How do you actually change the culture? Well, let me give you some results. In just the last 3 years, the Lyceum program has produced 2 Fulbright scholars. It has produced Clemson University's first, only, and ever Rhodes Scholar, the most prestigious scholarship in the world. We have a student at Harvard Law School. We currently have 2 students who are clerking on the Federal Court of Appeals, one of whom will start clerking this summer for the Supreme Court of the United States. We have 3 students doing masters at Oxford, 1 at Cambridge, and we currently have 6 of our students doing PhDs in political philosophy at top-notch schools around the country. So that's how you do it, right? You replicate your own ideas through these young people, who then will go out into the world, and they're going to become professors and teachers and homeschooling parents and little league soccer and baseball and football coaches and ballet instructors. That's how you change. That's how we retake this country.
Perfect. You actually answered the question that I was going to ask, is like planting a seed. What's one thing that people can do? That's kind of to wrap things up. What's somebody, like, whether it's me or it's just somebody listening to this, what can they do just to start down the road of teaching themselves and their children what we need to do to take the country back? Let's just say it that way, because that's what we have to do. What's like the best piece of advice that you could give?
The single most important piece of advice I can give is you have to begin with yourself, right? So I hear young people all the time, right? I hear 20-year-olds all the time. What's your goal in life? My goal is to change the world. right?
Right.
Which of course, on one hand is, admirable, I guess, but it's a conceit, and it's a silly conceit, right? Why don't you begin by changing yourself first, right? So, if we are to be a nation of free, self-governing people, you have to learn how to govern yourself first, and this is true for 60-year-olds as it is for 16-year-olds, right? You have to retake control of your own moral life. You have to educate yourself, right? And there are lots of great things that you can read, books you can read. I mean, I would say go to go to the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism website, go to our Lyceum site, and look at the course syllabi for this course, Wisdom of the Ancients. Start reading some Aristotle. Start reading some Cicero, and read Ayn Rand's novel, The Fountainhead.
Yeah.
That's the beginning of your own intellectual journey. And then the second thing I would say is it's no longer to be a couch potato. It's no longer good enough to be a conservative or libertarian or classical liberal or objectivist couch potato. You need to take action, and you need to and look. If you're just a regular, ordinary, everyday American and you're living in Hooterville, Indiana, your goal ought not to be Your goal ought not to be to change, what's going on in Washington. Your goal ought to be to change what's happening in Hooterville, right? Go to school board meetings. Support homeschooling communities where you live. Go after the education deep state in your local community. Call them out. Demand that they stop drugging and mutilating children. Right? America's government schools are actively promoting the drugging and mutilation of children. This is the single most immoral act of my adult lifetime, engaged by the government of the United States. It must end, and you must fight against it, and you must do it now. And you don't have to have a college degree in order to do that.
Agreed. Brad, it's an amazing episode. And tell everyone where they can find you. I know we've talked about it over and over again, but again, all the links and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the macro level, I would say go to the website of the Snow Institute for the Study of Capitalism at Clemson University. And if you want to dig more deeply, go to the Lyceum page of the website. And at the micro level for Brad Thompson personally, I'm on Twitter or X. I don't know what my Twitter handle is or X handle, but
either way, I'll find it and put it.
Yeah, it's C Bradley Thompson.
Okay.
And I also run a website, an education website called EdWatch Daily. That's EdWatch Daily, one word.com. But most importantly, if you want to learn more about my views on a variety of subjects, I have a Substack, and the Substack is named The Redneck Intellectual.
Nice.
So just Google The Redneck. It's actually, the URL is all one word, theredneckintellectual.com.
Okay. Awesome. I thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure meeting you, and we need to do it again some point.
Absolutely, Bennett. This was really fun. I enjoyed it very much. I'd be happy to do it again. And maybe one of the things that we can think about doing is having you come down to Clemson and do a podcast from down here, and which might broaden your audience a little bit.
Absolutely, for sure. I'm always open to it.
Cool.
All right.